Trustee Gonzalez Ewan,
I'm right here.
Trustee Polk,
Here.
Dr. Joker,
Here.
Jamil Tier,
Present.
Nate Myers,
Here.
Leslie Blakey.
Here.
You have quorum.
All right, we're all good. And so it's not actually on the agenda, but can we approve this agenda?
It is 1.3.
It is 1.3. Thank you. I have the paper upside down. Okay, thank you. So we've done the roll call and approval of the agenda. I'll move approval of the agenda. Can we get a second from you, Deanna?
Sure, second.
Okay, and then I'm just going to do this by acclamation. Any objection to the agenda as it is printed? All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, by unanimous consent, we've approved the agenda, and now we're going to move on to public communications. Is there anybody here from the public who would like to communicate to this committee? Seeing none, we're going to move on, and now we've got this agenda item approval of the minutes, and so I'm going to move approval of the minutes. And then we may need to have abstentions because I don't think anybody was here at the last meeting. Okay, so can you second that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, and then
I'll trust that they're great, so I'll vote yes.
okay. Nate? Okay, Leslie,
Abstain as I was not here.
thank you. Jamil,
Abstain as well, thank you.
Deanna,
My apologies. I don't think Nate has her microphone on. I cannot hear her.
she.
Sorry, I didn't have it on.
There we go. And what was her vote? I apologize.
We can do aye.
Oh, great. Thank you, ma'am.
I'm abstaining, and Deanna.
I was gonna abstain, but I don't know.
Okay, so no, that's fine. They haven't been officially approved because we don't really have a way of doing that, but that's fine. They stand as the minutes and they're just unofficial minutes, but the role of this committee largely is advisory in any case. And so I think we're fine. So let's move on to item 2.2 and 2.3. And I think what we can do is sort of roll these together into a discussion. And I want to introduce this. I started introducing this by saying that we've had board committees in the past. As near as I know, we've never had board committees with official membership appointed by shared governance constituents. Board committees have been board committees with board membership. My point in asking for appointments was to begin to create a model of shared governance where board members could interact directly with shared governance constituents to really just have better ears, better understand what's going on the ground. We can constitute ourselves any way we decide. And so we could say we have official membership by shared governance bodies. It makes making a quorum a teeny bit harder, maybe, or maybe not, depending on whether we've got board members showing up. But I'm presuming that we're going to eventually have a third board member. We're going to make quorum pretty easily. In order to function as this quasi online in-person body, we would need a quorum of people here in the room. Now, right now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 in the room and 2 online. And so we've easily met quorum. If we changed that in some way, it would affect that in some way. Mostly what I want is I want you as constituent members from shared governance bodies to feel fully included. So whether you are a liaison or whether you're a member matters not really to me. I think it matters more to the body, how you feel. And again, this body is completely advisory to the board. We take no official action in the name of the board. We're really largely an information gathering and a recommending body. So I'm going to just see, as we look at, I'm kind of jumping forward to
And may I make a clarification on that?
Please.
Nikki, if we're still using first names.
We are.
So, as you mentioned, being an advisory to the board, in that capacity, we're advising on policy and
Yes.
strategic directions.
Yep.
And I think it's important to state that because it's easy for us to slip into recommendations of operations.
Yep. Other thoughts on function and structure and charge?
I
Yeah.
think, so we've had a lot of discussions in our colleges as well about how do we meet Brown Act, and if actually participating in Zoom, but you're physically on the campus, then does that actually count as in person? For a variety of ways. So there's part of those discussions, the idea of being open as well as and transparent and allowing people to participate. So that's one set of conversations. And I think if we have a plan with enough time, we might be able to make it that more folks can actually be there in person, perhaps even like putting these right in front of a board meeting, perhaps, or something like that, so that it'd be easier for folks to get there. I'm not quite sure if that's a good timing. But I am sensitive to the conversations that we continue to have in the district about how we don't have input on shared governance. So even though it's more convenient for me right now to meeting hop Zoom to Zoom to Zoom, and that is functional as advisory, I tend to think that it might be a better optic to really have the members of the committee be members of the committee from our different groups, from our classified professionals, from our students, and from our faculty joining our board members.
Yeah.
Just because that is such a point of conversation right now around how do we make sure that the voices are heard. And in some ways, being members of the committee that are voting, then that is, so that is my vote for that, is that we're actually members of the committee, and that then we just need to figure out how we meet Brown Act to facilitate, for instance, folks that are on, approved reasons for just cause for not being able to be in person and still meeting quorum and things. So
Yeah. Jamil, do you have thoughts on this?
I do, and I have several actually. So I think in one of the emails for setup of this meeting, I mentioned that I am on a medical accommodation. And so I don't actually know if the board has a policy or a procedure for meeting those types of accommodations and sort of structuring them in line with what Peralta is doing. So I think that's a conversation that if it's not, it's bigger than probably this discussion item, but I do think the board, if we are to be board members or members of this committee, and it's not an ad hoc committee, there should be some procedure for us to be able to follow as a sort of standing and routine item, right? Because we might run into that again. Like Leslie, I do think that it's important for the students, the faculty, and the staff to be active members of this, so voting members of this body, or anybody that we're being asked to take time out of and to do the research and to do the work on, to ensure that that our perspectives are heard, right? And that our constituencies are actually a part of this discussion and the decision making or the recommendation making, as it were. And so, yeah, I think we just need to dig in on the charge and then figure out if an ad hoc committee makes sense, or, if we're looking at quorum and what that looks like in terms of moving forward.
Okay.
That sounds like a Brown Act question.
So it's partly a Brown Act question. And one of the things that we understand is the Brown Act has not stayed up with the technology. When we went to pandemic, there was some massive shift that we made, but in my estimation, that shift to online made public meetings far more accessible than they had been. People didn't have to come down, sit for hours and hours and hours waiting to make a 2-minute public comment or to just hear what was going on. And so I think the Brown Act is really out of sync with the intention of the Brown Act. So we're trying to meet a couple of needs here. And I think then the other question that we're dealing with, in addition to what are the technical requirements of the Brown Act, is how do people feel respected and included? And so if you have an advisory vote, does that advisory feel too insulting? If you're a liaison rather than a member, does that feel insulting? Does that feel dismissive? Because I want people to feel fully invested in the discussion. But really what I want is to be able to have deeper discussions that where the board can hear directly with no offense to administration, but not mediated through administration. And, you know, in an official board meeting, we get little reports, but I don't think I've ever seen a Peralta board meeting where in the middle of the meeting, somebody would say, well, Donald, what do you think about this? I've never seen that. Now, in other districts, that does in fact happen. And in other districts, you have union members at, you know, in the room with an official seat at the table. We don't do that here. I'm trying to be a little bit more expansive. So what I'm hearing from both Jamil and Leslie is you would like to be official members with an official vote. So as we think about sort of a charter and drafting a full charter that we can bring back for approval, I think that's what I'm hearing would be preferred, at least from the official representatives of classified and faculty. Does that sound right? Okay, is there any reason not to do that then? Have an official membership with an official full vote, not an advisory vote, not liaison vote? Okay, I don't know how if we're going to take a vote, frankly. I mean, I don't know that we're ever going to take a vote, but we'll see. We're new. So let's talk a little bit about the charge of the committee. And we have two things in our title. One is student success, which is super broad. And then the other is accreditation. And for the moment, we are accredited. Yay, that's good. Let's make
We've
sure.
always been accredited.
I mean,
Hold
we are fully accredited with no warning, no probation, no sanctions at all. We are fully recognized as being completely kosher with the accrediting commission. So I think that for the moment, we don't need to be focusing a lot on that. And so it's really the student success side of it. And I'll just say that from my perspective, one of the critical issues for student success is not just instruction and not just student services in a traditional way, but also understanding student readiness to learn and the student capacity to learn. And that's why I've prioritized on the agenda a deeper discussion of housing, which is a statewide problem, a regional problem, and we know from other studies, a Peralta problem. Now, I don't want us to get too spread out because we could study 1,000 different aspects of student success. I think, though, what we're trying to do is develop and recommend policy that is grounded in facts on the ground and operations. Like, what are we actually doing? And then how are we supporting students? And from my perspective, what I'd like us to do is how do we support students across the range of barriers and opportunities that allow students to be successful. So that's a pretty big charge. And what we would want to be doing, and this is why I was asking, could we have an update on research? Like, what are we looking at? What are the range of things people have already identified as being critical barriers to success? And then kind of zeroing in on one or two of those things at a time, not trying to get too broad. So what are other people's thoughts about the charge of the committee? Deanna? Yeah.
I think that there, like you said, Nikki, there's a wide range of things that could go towards what student success looks like. I know that housing, when I got elected, was one of the top priorities for a lot of us, including Trustee Jenkins, and so who is no longer a trustee anymore. So I think looking at housing as a top priority, I think is a good way to start. And
Okay.
then I would love to hear from other members of the committee on what they think that we should be focusing on.
Nate, thoughts?
I agree with you, because we are dealing with it in SSCCC. We've just had a lobby with Assemblyman Wicks regarding housing and student housing, and it is one of the biggest things that is not just during Peralta or through Peralta, it's actually through California. And we're talking about all of this junior colleges. We're actually getting ready for a conference at the end of the month with SSCCC. And that's one of the platforms that we're starting with, especially here in our Region 3 with our assemblymen. Because right now housing is so expensive and also so scarce for our students that it's become, do we go to school or do we go to work? And we're losing students because right now with everything being so high, we have to go to work in order to survive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I believe housing would be a great start
Good.
with it. Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to it at some point. Just for people who are watching who might not know, SSCCC is the Student Senate for the California Community Colleges, and I'd love to know better what SSCCC is doing. I see Leslie, you got a hand up. I'm going to come to you, and then Jamil, and then Stephanie.
Thank you. Yes, so while I think that housing, of course, is a topic of conversation, as we've seen with UC Berkeley and the People's Park discussions that are happening, it's very complicated to try and address the needs of housing. I also think that we have so many issues with our own infrastructure at Peralta, as we've discussed about, lack of heating, broken elevators, though appreciate Jamil is busy writing a lot of contracts for that. And again, we are not unique, because I just heard on the news that City College of San Francisco is having the same issues with boilers not working and classrooms being cold. So I guess that's reassuring. But it's in the infrastructure. We have so much issue with our own infrastructure. I'm wondering if a better place to put our efforts into the policy is to really make sure we're shoring up the gains we did in the pandemic of supporting with food and supporting with transit and getting our students to the campuses and getting our students food on the campuses and food around, around supporting their ability, because it's easier to study and retain when you have food that you've been able to prepare at home. And that perhaps that is a better place to put our initial efforts, because it seems to me a place that we might get more traction and success, and then start with those types of areas as opposed to housing, which is such a big problem. So
Yeah.
that's my thoughts.
Jamil, thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listening to everyone, housing is a huge issue. And I know when I was a student here and at the College of Marin years ago, it was an issue, and it's become a bigger issue and a harder issue to be able to address, right? Because as Nate said, as a student, you're worried about, hey, do I have time to do these classes, or should I be going to work? I think Leslie brought up a really great point, though. We have made a lot of really great inroads at each of our colleges during COVID in terms of addressing basic needs. So food, transportation, and making sure that our students have other support outside of housing, because it is such a huge issue to address. And so I do like the idea of sort of doing a little bit of research on how far we've come, what we might be able to do to bolster those efforts, and then sort of moving to the bigger picture of housing, because I think, looking at sort of best practices statewide, really, for the folks who are already sort of starting this housing journey, will give us a little bit of direction in terms of what we need to focus on when we get to those policies.
Great. Stephanie?
So I just I really want us to think a little bit, maybe take a step back, and think about our systems as far as shared governance and how information and decisions get made. We're right now talking about the goals of this committee, and I'm not sure I really understand the charge. I mean, like you said, Nikki, student success and is a really big area. So I hear we're starting to talk about specific goals we might want to investigate this year regarding what that lead to or contribute to student success. But there are other committees also doing this work on campus that are our shared governance committees, right? And so I want to make sure that we're not either duplicating effort or we're getting into a body of knowledge and then that communication isn't happening and other people are left out. So I understand that this body is, as a standing committee, is making recommendations to the board, but that also has to go through the campuses and, you know, the district level committees. And one of the complaints has been that our systems of shared governance have not been always as clear as maybe they could be. And I don't want us to make it more complicated. So maybe we could take a step back and kind of figure out what is the chain of information that when we start getting into this stuff that where are we going to take it? Are we just going straight to the board? How are we disseminating what we're doing? I guess that's where I want to be a little bit more clear.
Yeah, and I think part of it is that we are building the plane as we're flying it. Frankly, I don't know of a community college district in the state where you would look and say, oh, that's the best model of shared governance. It completely works. I will say, though, that within our district, individual campuses actually have pretty excellent models. So if you look at the shared governance handbook from Laney College, it's a really good document. It's very well thought out. The committee structure is super clear. The charge and the rationale is super clear. We don't have such a thing district-wide. Chancellor is trying to build things like that. She's going to be here for a bit, and hopefully we have a new chancellor who is fully committed to resourcing and developing that model district-wide. So I think, Stephanie, your questions are super appropriate. I don't know that we're going to be able to answer those. So let me just say two other thoughts about housing. At Peralta, anytime we begin to talk about land and property, it's a minefield because there's so much suspicion. There's so much like, who's trying to steal our stuff? You know, is Kaiser going to come and take our football training field? Is it some private developer is going to try to take our campus? Are the Warriors or the, whatever developer, are they going to try to come and take land from us? And so the reason that I'm trying to surface this is just like have as much transparency as possible so that people understand this isn't being driven by somebody's private agenda to make a profit off of the public dime. No, this is something that's really being driven for the welfare of our community and our students. And I think to the extent that we make that clear, transparent, open, and get a lot of input from the beginning, if we begin a discussion of housing, we could set that foundation right.
So would the board, I don't know if there are other hands up. I don't want to jump the line.
No, go
Okay.
right.
Would the board, so to me, that's a single issue committee if we're really focusing on housing or even basic needs. Leslie mentioned transportation and food insecurity, and then we have our facilities. And so I'm wondering, kind of to talk about that Brown Act, going back to that Brown Act question, is it the intent that this become an ad hoc committee on that single issue? And if so, then we don't have a Brown Act issue. Or are we operating as a standing committee with a charge that we really need to develop and take forward so it's consistent no matter who's on the board? Because it has to live past us.
Yeah.
So I guess I want to take that step back and find out what it is we're trying to accomplish in the structure in which we're trying to accomplish it.
Yeah. Let me say the second thing that I was going to say. So thank you for that point. Again, we are talking about an overall charge. I think that, and I'll go back to some drafting before we come to our next meeting, and maybe based on input that I'm hearing here, draft up a short paragraph that kind of takes in the scope of student success and accreditation. And then understanding that at any given time, you can only really, multitasking actually isn't a thing. You can do one thing
That's right. Right.
at
I
a
appreciate that.
at a given time. And so we can continue that discussion about the sort of the broader charge. And I'll come back with a draft for consideration at our next meeting. Second thing I want to say about housing is that, we've got a housing study going on right now within the district. We got a little housing grant to do the study, and it's not a lot of money, given the scope of what we're trying to do. We're not alone in the state trying to do this. And so I think we can be looking and seeing, well, what are other districts doing? I will say that the district where I teach went out in 2020 for a bond. And we included in that facilities bond affordable housing as something that bond money could be spent on. Foothills De Anza is earmarked between $200 and $300 million for affordable housing. $200 and $300 million of affordable housing. And like Peralta, Foothills De Anza has a lot of land. That's 10% of your costs right there. And if you're doing your construction with bond dollars, well, then you're not having to pay back the loan. And so then your operating costs really are maintenance, security, and operations of the housing. And so you really could do way below market housing. It also is clear that if we're going to be doing international recruiting, that's also a real possibility. International recruiting not only benefits the milieu of the district by providing an international component to what we do, but also if you're an international student or the parent of an international student, and you have the opportunity to actually be housed on the campus with advisors and security, that could be enormously appealing. And I think that could also then not only enhance the cultural milieu, but it would also really enhance our revenues, because international students provide significant resources in ongoing revenue to the district. Many districts in the state, rely on the millions of dollars that international students bring in. So I think there's some real possibilities here that could all enhance student success. Again, what I want us to be looking at is, well, what are other districts doing? I don't think they're super far ahead of us, though.
Do we have anyone on hands up?
No.
Okay. So in one of my former lives, when I was a vice president of instruction, I oversaw our dorms and our international. And the issues that Peralta has, I don't mean to say that we should not be looking at this issue. Okay. So let me start with that.
Yeah.
But I also want to recognize that the current issues we have without dorms, public safety, facilities, total cost of ownership, all of those things become exacerbated, not to mention the Title IX issues that come with having co-ed dorms. And so I kind of like what Leslie said about focusing maybe a little bit smaller. I think that housing exploration is already going on, and those decisions will come to the board as normal. I don't know if this committee focusing on it as well is going to make that work any quicker or any more robust. So I just know that there's a lot to deal with when it comes to housing. I can give you an update on the feasibility study that they're doing. One little push is that we're in the survey phase right now. I hope you all got that. Please, the vendor is asking for more. We've only had about 450 respondents, and we need a much higher response rate for them to do the feasibility study. So I'm putting that out
Stephanie,
there.
can you make sure that, I see Leslie's hand up and I'll come to you in a second. Can you make sure that all the committee members get a copy of the survey
Sure.
so that we can see what are they asking about? What's the scope of
Yeah.
the study
Yeah, yeah.
looking like, et cetera? So I'm hearing a lot of interest here. I'm also hearing red flags. We are overwhelmed with what's at hand, and this is a super complicated area with 1,000 tentacles, which is probably true of kind of every issue we're going to look at. So
Yeah.
Leslie, you've got a hand up, go.
Yeah, thanks. And I just want to support what Stephanie said, because I think that it's really important that we come up with something that we can actually move forward and provide good advice for. And I think if pandemic taught us many things, but one of the lessons we really learned was the central place that schools hold for supporting the basic needs like food and transportation, as well as access to education. So getting back to whether or not we're a standing or an ad hoc committee, I don't feel strong enough about one way or the other. I just want to say I'm fine with either way we do it. In some ways, it almost seems like ad hoc gives us a little more freedom to then come in and advise, but I could be misunderstanding that. So in that case, maybe I would lean towards ad hoc. And then I just wanted to apologize because I'm going to have to transition to my other meeting. And I do appreciate as we work on scheduling, I would say my advice for scheduling is it might be easiest to like send out doodle polls. And that's kind of how I try and address a variety of people's schedules, because I am willing to get there in person. I just have to have set up the logistics of getting from Laney over to the district and back again to do that. So anyway, I've enjoyed meeting you all, and I'm gonna just have to hop off now.
Leslie, before you
I'm here.
before you do jump off, is it that Thursdays are just really tough for you?
It's not that Thursdays are tough for me. Actually, I can make Thursdays. I just have to have known before I set up all the other meetings. And, I had like a president's council meeting that had gotten moved on because of the professional development day. And then I had something else that was standing. So I can make the room. I just have to have enough time to plan for that. Does that make
I
sense?
actually liked her, Leslie's suggestion
Of
about
the
maybe,
doodle poll.
or I think Leslie, didn't you suggest even be before a board meeting? I mean, unless you two have a hard time getting here earlier.
It's not that, it's that board days are
It's
already
really long.
packed for us. We're
Fair
in
enough.
board.
I'm
If
with
you
you.
stack on
I know.
another
I-
hour and a half on
I'm
top
here
of
all
our
the-
4 to 10,
I guess- Okay, fair enough.
you often see
Totally
me
fair.
standing up in meetings and moving around. My body doesn't tolerate sitting for 6 hours.
Maybe the Thursday after a board meeting in that week even is a little bit, for some of us who have to come down a
Yeah.
mountain.
So what
Yeah.
what I'd like to do, Leslie, before you go, is see, would people feel comfortable meeting monthly on a Thursday with enough notice? And so I'm good later in the afternoon if that's better, but Deanna, you've got a schedule as well. And, everybody here's got schedules.
We'll send out a doodle poll. We'll try to
right.
we'll try to just target a Thursday after at the same week of a board meeting. And then,
I don't
Yeah.
like it being in the same week.
well, I'm kind of pushing for that because I have to drive down a mountain.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's actually a little easier in some ways to make that for me, because that's also board meetings are also Senate meeting days. So
So you can block it in. Okay.
I'll lock in that week.
I'll do the doodle pool.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And again, I enjoyed meeting everyone.
Leslie, thank you so much. I look forward to working with you.
Look forward to working with everybody.
All right.
Thanks. Thanks, Nikki. Bye-bye.
As we think about other areas of student success readiness, what are the other topics that people think this would be worth taking taking some time to look at? I've got 3 or 4 in mind, but rather than me dictate that agenda, I'd love to hear, are there things that other people that rise to the top as people look at issues around student success?
I think right now, the basic needs is where most students are at. Just being at College of Alameda and knowing that our students are struggling with having to do a couple of jobs in the process of trying to make sure that they feed their family or feed themselves. And at Alameda, I feel like we have like an older student population as well.
Yeah.
So with that, it is harder to juggle having to make sure we can maintain our family lifestyle.
Yeah.
And also make sure that we can go to school. Me being an older student myself, I have 2 children, and it is a struggle to figure out if I'm going to actually go to class or go to school.
Yeah.
Because even right now, I don't even have financial aid for myself. So with not having financial aid, having to have the burden of having a job outside of school, which means I have to take online classes, which some of our students have to take online late night classes because they're working throughout the day. I think basic needs right now, whatever that might be, whether it's housing, whether it's food, and whether it's transportation, those are what students are looking at this moment on our campuses. We have to be really realistic of what we're looking at. And especially for food insecurity, we know that there's CalFresh, but that only goes so far. And you have to make so much in order to be able to actually be approved for it. So a lot of our students may not be able to be approved for it.
Yeah.
So those are the basics. I really believe in my heart and my soul from what I'm dealing with at school. Basic needs with housing, food insecurity, and transportation are the ones we should really look into. I know that on all different campuses, I know Laney, we have different resources, but the resources aren't enough for all the students who actually need it. Like we have Tasty Tuesdays, and we're feeding the students, we're feeding almost 175 students and staff on Tuesdays. And we have people coming back and asking, can they have a second to take home? So we're seeing it on the front lines that we need help. We have different grants for like Safeway. We have give out gift cards for the Safeway, but it's a one-time voucher of $300. And if you're looking at a family of 4, that's not even going to feed you for 2 weeks. So for me as a student being on campus and seeing it, that's what I would like to see the committee go after, is those basic needs.
Yeah.
We need to figure that out some way that Peralta can help just a little bit more, even with students who are homeless. We're even dealing with that. And we're not even really looking at how many homeless students we actually have. We have students living in their cars in the parking lots at school because there's no other place for them to go. I just found out that even at Alameda, the city of Alameda is going to be maybe working with our school for tiny home project because they're starting to build that backed by our soccer field. Is that going to be good? We have no idea because we don't know the stipulations of what all happens with that. So I really believe as a student, we need to work on basic needs first. Let's really look at what students absolutely need. I know the district, we have constrictions on what we can do and what we can't do, but let's really look at what the whole student needs, not partly.
Yeah. Deanna, you have thoughts on this? Scope, focus.
Sure. I think
Yeah.
that that's a really great way of looking at it, because I think a lot about my time when I was a student and how much I struggled, and I didn't really know what was available to me. And I just wonder what this committee can do to kind of contribute to letting students know about the resources that are available, connecting them to community groups, et cetera. So that might be something that we will want to look into, putting together some sort of guide or something like that.
Yeah. That reminds me that, there's legislation that requires that the county have a liaison around basic needs.
Yeah.
How well are we taking advantage of that? Does that actually really exist?
That's a great
Et
question.
cetera. Jamil, do you have thoughts? We're again still just talking about scope, charter, charge.
Yeah, I mean, I think, listening to the student voice on this group is what we're here for, right? Or as at least something that I hope to hear more of and to be able to support. You know, we talked about housing. I did hear Stephanie's point when she said, you know, that the issues that we have as Peralta will sort of be exasperated if we're looking at housing. And it makes sense to me to start with these smaller things because again, we have some knowledge of what we've been doing over the past few years. And so there might be a way for us to be able to sort of strengthen what we're doing. I love the idea of a guide or resources, a resource book for our students or a resource website, I guess, for our students to be able to know what else is out there and to be able to connect them with support. So I think that that's probably the best place for us to start in terms of what we can do quickly and what we might be able to be able to see immediate support of our students with. So
I want to,
Nikki, may I jump in before you?
please, I was actually right about to call on you because so
Yeah.
go
so
to your thought and then I'm
okay.
going to ask you a specific question, please.
I have a
Stephanie.
feeling we're going to be talking about the same thing. I think one of the things that goes back to how do we define operations versus policy here? Yeah, and I don't have an answer to that because to me, a resource guide seems really good, but now we're directing staff to be putting a resource guide together. And so this is where I need a little assistance in how do we support the strategic priorities of the board without going around the chancellor? So.
Yeah. That wasn't where I was going.
Oh, okay. Well,
But
good.
it's a really good point. And I think that part of the challenge that we have as a board is that we're making policy, but if the policy isn't grounded in a deep understanding of the operations, then the policy doesn't work.
Mhm.
And so the question I was going to ask you was this: if we look at the next item on the agenda, and that's 2.4, an update on student housing study and other institutional research, I think one of the things that we can do as a board committee is better understand what in fact is the scope of what's happening within the district. So Stephanie, one of the things you said early on was, look, there are other, like, just take the issue of housing. There are other bodies within the district looking at this question. So we've got a study going on. What other committees are working? You know, what's happening in our student success or our student services programs? What are they doing? What are they looking at across the district? And so what I wanted to ask you is, as we look at our Office of Institutional Research, do you know of the range of research going on right now within the district, both at the district level and at the college level, that specifically are looking at student readiness, student success, student needs, basic needs? What are we doing? And I'll just contextualize this in some of the work that we did down at Foothill De Anza. I oversee, co-direct our student internship program for our union interns. So we have a bunch of student interns working with the union political action committee. And one of the things they wanted to know was, well, Nate, you listed out food, family obligations, job obligations, housing, access to financial aid, scheduling, modality of instruction, and you probably made a couple of others, all of which can be opportunities for success or they're barriers. And one of the things that group of interns did was they did what they called a burden survey. They said, here, look, student body, when you look at what it is that is in your way of being successful, what are the principal burdens that you face, just to be able to sit down in a classroom or at your desk or in your lab and learn what's getting in the way, so that they could begin to develop an empirical understanding of the principal things. I'm wondering at Peralta, what research are we doing that does that assessment, so that in fact we could prioritize and say, that's the critical thing, and there's the critical opportunity. Do you know that?
Yeah, let me
range?
give you, I'm gonna give you a high level because I didn't ask Francisco this question before we came in, but
Yeah,
before, your question actually sparked an idea for me before I answer your question, and that is maybe the role of this committee, the board gets a lot of presentations. So you get a presentation from IR, institutional research on the student climate survey.
Yep.
You get it, you'll get it for housing. I'm wondering if maybe before these presentations come to the full board, that we could use this committee for that information gathering. Because you mentioned those board meetings are really long and you get a lot of information. I'm wondering if we couldn't use this committee as a way to filter some of that information and then put the highlights to the full board.
mhm,
That might be a really good use of time for this committee. You'll be getting that information from these other committees that are going around the district.
yeah,
So that was my idea. Okay, so to answer your question, we did a climate survey. We worked with our faculty union to also, because we asked about things like experience in the classroom, things like that. And we wanted to make sure that faculty were comfortable with the questions and the information we were trying to glean, not on specific faculty, more as, aggregate information. And so that survey went out. We had a really good response rate. And the second part is just now happening, and we're doing focus groups. Part of the questions we asked, and it was based on your suggestion, was about how much time do you spend preparing to learn? And how much time do you spend outside of the classroom on your learning? And so we did ask those questions, and it is part of the focus group. So that's going on now. So you will be getting, and we can have the information come here when they're done doing all of the analysis of the survey itself, and then the qualitative analysis. But the other thing that I want to make sure that we're looking at is when we talk about barriers, it's not just things that happen with the student externally. We have barriers that we create for our students. And so the other part of the research that happening is the chancellor asked, we have a consultant named Kathy Bader, who used to be with Huron. She's now with High Point. And we actually had her working to help us identify, where do students get stuck? Where are pain points of applying, registration, getting counseling? And so that work is also going on. She also did student focus groups. So there's quite a bit of information getting collected right now. I don't have the survey answers or the data collected to give you at the moment, but that is something we could absolutely bring to this group.
Stephanie, as with the housing survey, could you make sure that the committee members just get a copy of the climate survey so
Yep.
that we can see what are the questions being asked? We don't
Yep.
have results yet.
Yep.
And then the outline of the focus group questions.
Yeah, we wanted to, we're still, we're just now putting those focus groups together because there were other research efforts going on.
Yeah.
We didn't want to ask the same questions over and over. So
Yep.
we're trying to do it in a much broader, comprehensive way. So we're not, we're actually getting real information, not, that surface level. Like,
Yeah.
so what do you think? We
Yeah,
wanted
yeah.
to really get down to the meat of the issues. So let me get those out to you.
That would be super helpful. And I think that as the committee members, Jamil, I saw you hand up a minute ago. I was right about to come back to you. I think as the committee members see that, I think that then we might have some thoughts about kind of how does that inform our work
Mhm.
and what feedback might we have just right away. Jamil, you had a hand up, but I see it went down. Did you have something?
It was I guess really to assure Stephanie that when I was talking about the guide, that it was a recommendation to the board for a guide. I know that, well, it's a longer story, but yes, I wanted to make sure that it was clear that I do understand that we are not an operational committee. We are making recommendations. And I think you even mentioned, what is our work with the county liaison? So that's something I'd love to hear more about.
Good. And again, the recommendations to the board are mostly at a policy level. But here's where it then crosses over to operations. The board sets with the chancellor operational goals. We say, Chancellor, we would like you to focus on these things. These are the things we're going to measure you by. This is your charge. And chancellor comes to us, a good chancellor always does, and says, how can I help you as a board be successful in reaching your goals for our community? You're the elected representatives from our community. You're the only people here who are empowered to do that. What do you want me to be doing? And so it's an interactive, reiterative process where if we don't understand what's going on the campuses and we're not being really deeply informed by people in classified, the faculty and the students, then when we set goals, we're not doing a good job. We can only do that if we understand what you need, what you want, what the staff is actually already doing, et cetera. So that boundary between operations and policy isn't a fine line. It's a really porous, interactive line.
I think, right, I agree, for sure. I also think that there's a way to say, hey, here's the direction, but we're not going to tell you, here's the goal, but we're not going to tell you how to get there. To me, how to get there is the operations.
Yeah.
So that's how I've always looked at it, is the what, not the how. And so I think if we can just remember that as a committee,
Yeah.
that to me is the easiest way. I mean, I think it's very big, but. okay.
Yeah. And so that in and of itself is an interesting question. You know, when we look at the how, there are actually some policy questions around the how. So for example, you have, you can say,
True lawyer, Nikki.
our goal is to accomplish X, but one of the things that we want to do is make sure that X is done within the context of a good climate, in a good, so like we might have goals around shared governance. We say, well, we would like a highly functioning shared governance process. Okay, that's a policy goal that deals with process, which is a how. And so even there.
Yeah, I hear, I agree. Like I said, it's vague, but it's the best way I could visualize, because even if you say we want a really effective, everything's so subjective, right? We really want effective shared governance. Well,
how would we measure
how
that?
do we measure that?
Yeah.
Is it effective to the board, or is it effective to the classified professionals,
And so we would then in that situation maybe say, well, we'd like you to come up with a measurement of effectiveness.
Yeah.
And then we can evaluate whether your measurement is a very good measurement and give you feedback on that. Anyway, I want to raise one other thing and just sort of highlight it as an issue for us. What I've been hearing is, and you hear this all the time in this district, capacity. What do we have the capacity to do? Are we asking people to now take on an additional burden in an already overwhelming situation? So for example, if we talk about housing, who would do that? You've already got massive infrastructure problems. And Jamil, you know this really, really, really well. You're completely overwhelmed with what's on your table. Now, can you imagine now adding 1,000 units of housing on 3 or 4 campuses? So we've got this question of resources. And one of the things that I want to just flag for us to be thinking about is, what additional resources could we tap into that wouldn't in fact burden us more, but in fact would relieve burden? So for example, if you just think about housing, if we weren't responsible for the management of the housing, we were just like, here, we're going to coordinate the funding and the structure of the housing, but we're going to find some external agency that does housing, that does maintenance, that does student services, that does security, et cetera. And you build that into the financial model. Now you've outsourced that. It's now not on general services to do window maintenance on, or whatever it is.
They come with their own challenges. But can I speak to the housing issue for a second?
Yeah, and I
So,
just use housing as an example. It could be the Alameda County Food Bank that
Yeah.
we're,
Right. Oh, okay. Well, if
partnering
you,
with.
yeah,
It could be any number of agencies or entities that we might partner with or contract with, provided that we could figure out the funding and financing of such a thing. What are the resources that are possible that we're not tapping into?
Well, I agree with the capacity issue here is significant.
Overwhelming.
It is significant.
Yeah.
And so, I want to kind of go back to what is the committee going to focus on? Because, I think I know that you said you were going to make a draft of the charge, but I do think, look, we're already in March. And we've got a couple more months before this academic year. And so I guess my question is, how do we, even if we're meeting once a month, what is it that we want to accomplish and in what subject? So if I've heard a lot of ideas, and maybe if we could just come to that decision for today, or because the end of the semester is coming quick.
It is.
And so I guess I just want to know what is it, the outcome we're trying to achieve for just the next couple of months?
Well, the first thing that I would like us to do is actually understand better the research that's going on.
Okay.
So if we could understand the current climate survey and the current housing survey, I think that would then inform quite a bit. We'd be able to, in your climate survey, you've already identified 12 issues that you think are probably important. I think if we can just even begin to get preliminary response, preliminary data, if we could begin to understand what are the questions being asked, it may be that members of this committee would say, wow, there's a huge gap right there. Let's make sure that we fill that gap in our understanding. And then I think we could begin to dig in a little bit better. I think the other thing that, because for me, and I'll just say, look, this is, and I don't think I'm alone in this, because housing is in fact a top priority for me, and I think a couple of other people here. I think gathering more information on what's happening around the state in terms of funding models, et cetera, would be really helpful. And I know we've got at least one college president who's very interested in housing on campus.
So I'll ask the chancellor about that one, because she really has to. The feasibility study is looking at the feasibility of what we are doing, what
Yep.
we can do.
Yep.
It is not looking at what's going on across the state. I will say, just on a side note, did you see the LAO's analysis, which is the Legislative Analyst Office for the state of California? I shouldn't use acronyms. Their viewpoint on community college housing.
No, I haven't seen that. I'd be interested.
They basically think we should not do it because there's no need. That that only CSUs and UC should do it.
It says people who live in already existing housing.
Right,
Thank you.
exactly. Well, and when I was talking to, we have an advocacy group for the state of Cal that works with us in Sacramento, and their name is MGI, and the guy that runs it is named Mark. And so I was talking to Mark, and I said, well, that's because they don't understand that community college housing has a completely different purpose than what CSU and UC housing is.
Yeah.
CSU and UC housing is, we're getting students from everywhere. Where do we put them? Our housing is, we have students in our community that are homeless. Where do we put them? and
more
and
importantly,
LAO does not understand that. So I say that because as the state is looking at the $25 billion deficit that's coming, that the LAO is predicting.
Yep.
And they may revise, which is where the governor, I'm trying to say this so that people who are listening, I don't assume what people know. The governor will do his revision with new information based on taxes than what he put out in January for his proposal for his budget. So I'm just wondering how many housing, we'll see how many housing studies continue and what they're going to do with that money.
I think one of the things they're not getting is that at the local level, there are resources. So look, Alameda County has $1 billion housing bond. Santa Clara County has $1 billion housing bond. Voters approved these things. Community colleges are really, really popular. We have never in this district lost lost a bond campaign. Community college students are wildly popular among the populace, right? And we know we've got a housing crisis. So down at Foothill De Anza, we raised $300 million for affordable housing for students, faculty, and staff. The voters did that. State of California didn't have to pony up a lot of money for this.
Mhm.
So this is where I'm saying there are resources to be tapped into. Let's think about that. And, you know,
Yeah, I think to start, I think your idea of just hearing what we've done,
yeah,
we can definitely give you an update at the next meeting for
Yeah.
sure. I don't know if the feasibility for housing will be done. I think it's due June 1st.
I think the other thing we could do is we could talk to the folks at Foothill De Anza, which are doing a feasibility study. I think they're a little bit ahead of us.
Mm.
And so let's find out.
Do you know who
Who's-
they're using?
I don't. I could
Maybe
find
you and
out.
I can have.
I could find out really easily. We've got an affordable housing task force there
Yeah.
that's specifically set up. It's faculty, staff, student
Mhm.
administrative task force that's specifically looking at affordable housing.
Yeah, we have the vendor that we're using is Volz, VOLZ, just so you
Okay.
know. So if they're doing that too, that would be it would be
Yeah, I
helpful,
don't
but
think that's the vendor, but
Yeah.
I can look into that.
okay.
So I think for our next agenda, if we can prioritize understanding the research
Sure.
that's going on right now, that will begin to help us identify both external and
Student
internal
need
barriers.
research.
Student needs research and then the housing
Barriers to
research.
success,
Yeah.
basically. Okay,
And-
Sasha, did you get that?
Stephanie, real
Yeah.
quickly, can you update us on the DOE, our response to the DOE, Department of Education
Yes, yeah.
demand for information?
Yeah,
et cetera?
so the Department of Ed, under the financial aid, or Title IV of the Higher Education Act, did they call it an evaluation, it was really an audit. And we had some findings that we're addressing, we have to address by April 3rd. We are doing very well in the response. I want to thank Ken Lear, our Director of Financial Aid here at the district, and Tina Vasconcelos, our Associate Vice Chancellor of Ed Services, who have really driven the work. We will have a draft response in about a week and a half. And that will then go to the board, probably just as an information item. I have to talk to the
What's
chancellor.
the
That's
gist
his-
of the inquiry?
You know, I don't have the findings, but it had to do with reconciliation. It had to do with getting money back, returning money back to the department controls.
So this was mostly around financial aid?
It was all around financial aid,
Okay, so it was financial aid controls.
all financially controlled. Yeah.
Okay,
And we had a couple of findings and a few recommendations that we're working on.
Okay.
And it's helping to improve our processes. Yeah.
so two things to note about that. One is that we do have internal fixes that we need to be doing. But the second thing is we're constantly responding to demands for information and requests. Every time we get an external agency or a Public Information Act request, or even an internal committee request for information, it's enormously time consuming.
Mhm.
And you have like a meeting like this, and it's drawing on my time, on Deanna's time. We're gonna have a third person, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 staff people here. It's an enormous drain or investment, depending on how we frame it. But I'm super mindful of how difficult it is. And oftentimes the requests are completely legitimate, and sometimes they're frivolous. So, thanks. And thank you, Tina and company, for,
Yeah.
making sure we don't get in hot water, or we get our foot out of the hot water that we're in. So,
Well, and just to make note, I just wanted to point out that some of the issues were really because we've had turnover in the financial aid offices at the campuses. We didn't even have a director here at the district for years. We just got that person, I want to say, what was it? 6 months ago, right? Yeah, and so now we have a financial director at every campus. And so the work, we had some holes there in staffing for a while, and
Yeah.
that makes a difference.
So we are almost out of time. I'm going to make a request of our shared governance partners, students, staff, faculty. Could you get an alternate appointed? If we're going to be an official committee that needs quorum, needs a certain number of people to make quorum, it'd be really helpful to make sure that we can always do that. And then the other thing is to think about this, especially for the students. Natea, I don't know how long you're going to be here. Hopefully you'll transfer and move on to doing other things, but we need a pipeline. You know, so often in our shared governance bodies, we throw people into the work and they're not ready for it because they haven't been trained, they haven't studied it, they're not being oriented. This is true of trustees oftentimes. And then you have lack of continuity and you're starting all over and it's crazy. And so if we could have alternates appointed who could come, lend an ear and, you know, be participants in the process, but also be the bench that we're kind of training up so that Jamil, sometimes if you can't make it, we've got somebody from classified. And then you've got a classified partner to be thinking about like, oh, from a classified perspective, here is a critical issue. And you're not doing that necessarily alone. For a bunch of reasons, having alternates would be, I think, super helpful. Is there any problem with that other than that it asks for more help and more time?
No, I can definitely ask our governance, who would like to be an alternate.
That'd be
So we
great.
have a couple of them there, even though we're right now in elections. We're in the middle of elections, so we don't know who the student body will be for next term, but
Yeah.
I will put that out there.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a student body president. You know, it could be somebody you think they're definitely going to be here next year, so that we've got that continuity would be really helpful. Okay, for the good of the order, updates from members of the committee. Any updates, Deanna? Natea? Jamil, anything else?
No update, thank you.
Steph? All right. Well, with 2 minutes early, I think we can end. This has been a really rewarding start. I hope we can really develop real collegiality in this setting. And maybe we can begin to help model out what shared governance could look like if we really were kind of collectively putting our shoulders to the wheel, not with suspicion, but with real solidarity. Sasha, you've got a hand up?
Yes, sir. I just wanted to clarify, have we confirmed the next meeting date?
No, we haven't. We're looking at a Thursday of the next, of like a monthly meeting that meets at the time that the week that the board meets, either in the morning or the afternoon. We're going to try to put out a doodle poll to
So
clarify time, but
I can let you know now, right now, the 2 meetings in April are Tuesday, April 11th, and then Tuesday, April 25th. So the idea would be to have the next meeting either on Thursday, the 13th, or Thursday, the 27th. So the 13th or the 27th will be the 2 days I will be asking.
okay, let us just pencil in the 13th, which is a month off. And is there a conflict for anybody on the 13th? At this time? Okay, but if,
I'm so sorry. Yes, I do have a conflict. It's my next one would be on the 13th from 11 to 12.
okay, so let's try to meet in the afternoon on the 13th, and Sasha, would you be able to, and I know I don't direct you,
It's okay. You can ask.
would you be able to put out a poll for a time in the afternoon? And if we could just pencil in
Does 2 to 3:30 work for everybody?
2 to 3:30. Does that work for everyone?
She has a 12 to 1. I'm thinking we try to give everybody, time to leave.
Jamil, does that
Correct.
work for you?
SEIU is in negotiations on Thursdays, so I can probably make it work because I don't have anything scheduled, but that has been our standing negotiation date. So I did leave today to be here, but I'll
Okay.
figure it out.
So we're penciling in 2 to 3:30 and let's just see if that works for Leslie. But we've got the afternoon, anytime after Nate is
That's
done
fine.
at
2 to
noon.
3:30 is fine.
And you're done at noon?
I'm done at noon and I'm actually here, so it'll make
Okay.
it easier.
So we've got all afternoon to try to schedule that particular day. Okay, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate everybody being here. Sasha, did you have your hand still up?
Oh,
or-
no, my apologies. I'll lower it.
Okay, I think we're all good. Thank you again. Oh,
Meeting
I
adjourned.
don't have a gavel. Would you just bang that over there?
Sure. Why not? We're adjourned.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.